Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank you all for coming in this morning, and we'll start by introducing the panel who will speak in turn after me. Malcolm Newsom, who will present on behalf of himself and Gary Ridgway, our review team. Chief Constable Stephen Watson. The leader of Rochdale Council, Councillor Neil Emmett. Sarah Robotham, Maggie Oliver, and then Deputy Mayor Kate Green, and I will say something as well after Kate. Back in 2017, shortly after I was first elected, the BBC documentary, The Three Girls, was first broadcast, and it was followed by The Betrayed Girls, the documentary. It prompted a public debate about child sexual exploitation in Greater Manchester, and specifically the making of a serious allegation that lessons from the tragic death of Victoria Agolia in Manchester in 2003 and the failure of Operation Augusta in Manchester were not learned by GMP, and that this led several years later to similar failures in Rochdale. That is not something I could ever hear and ignore. It led me to establish this wide-ranging review, and the report being published today finds unequivocally that failures that could and should have been avoided were in fact repeated. In the words of the report, it represents a, quote, lamentable strategic failure by leaders in the Greater Manchester system at the time. Over many years, Greater Manchester Police failed to give the investigation of these serious crimes the priority and resources necessary. The report is hard to read. It gives a detailed and distressing account of how so many young women were seriously harmed and appallingly failed. But it does fulfill the central purpose of why I set up this review in the first place. It is only by facing up fully and unflinchingly to what happened in all of its horrifying detail that we can be sure of bringing about the whole system culture change that is necessary on this critically important issue. I would like to thank those who have had the courage to come forward and share what happened to them. We know how difficult it must have been for you and still is. We are sorry that you were so badly failed by a system that should have protected you. I have asked the Deputy Mayor to ensure that all necessary support continues to be provided to you, also to the organisations who have supported you, and I know that Kate will address this when she speaks. We wouldn't be here this morning, and this report would never have happened were it not for the efforts of Sarah Robotham and Maggie Oliver. To blow the whistle when things are wrong takes determination and courage. It has personal consequences in so many ways. Today's report fully vindicates them and their decision to do so. They have done a major service to those they supported every step of the way, as well as to wider public protection in Greater Manchester going forward, and we thank them both for it. It is important to make clear that the events described in this report took place over 10 years ago, and that things have changed in that time. The people who were involved at a decision-making level are no longer working in Greater Manchester. Recent Ofsted inspections have found the way children at risk of sexual exploitation are protected by Rochdale's children's services has improved. GMP has established a specialist force-wide child sexual exploitation unit. Many perpetrators have since been brought to justice. Nevertheless, the public will rightly want reassurance on a number of points. First, that any new leads arising from this report are fully investigated and perpetrators pursued regardless of the passage of time. I have asked the Chief Constable to address that issue shortly. Second, that internal disciplinary action is taken against individuals who failed in their duties. I have asked both Greater Manchester Police and Rochdale Council to address this matter directly, and I'm today making the same request of the Crown Prosecution Service in the North West. It is truly shocking that Amber, who it was recognised in early 2011 was a victim and wrongly arrested in 2009, was subsequently named as a co-conspirator in September 2011 and on the indictment for the trial. The report finds that this was due to a legal tactical decision to bring out evidence in court critical to Operation Span. The fact that it was done without her knowledge or any regard for her welfare or safety is shameful. In response to this revelation, I am today writing to the Chief Crown Prosecutor for the North West, requesting that he investigate whether any disciplinary action is appropriate in respect of those involved in this decision, and also to report on whether there is any protocol in place now to prevent a repeat of such a decision, and if not, to introduce one. The report also contains a very troubling revelation with relation to Child 44 and the retention of a fetus following a termination. The retention with neither her knowledge nor consent, nor that of her parents. I have asked the Chief Constable to review that specific issue, as well as GMP's current practice and training arrangements in respect of the Human Tissue Act. The report covers many other serious issues, and to take us through the detailed findings, I would now like to invite Malcolm to come forward to present. As he does, I wish to take this opportunity to thank him, to thank Gary, and the previous Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverly Hughes, for sticking the course on this difficult task, for doing such a painstaking and forensic job, and in so doing, enhancing the protection of young people in Greater Manchester. Malcolm.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. In 2017, the BBC broadcast a documentary, The Betrayed Girls, about child sexual exploitation in Greater Manchester. This documentary alleged that the Crisis Intervention Team, a sexual health service in Rochdale, had notified GMP and Rochdale Council of dozens of cases of child sexual exploitation prior to 2008, but that both agencies had failed to protect these children. Although Operation Span concluded in 2012 with the conviction of 9 men, it was alleged that GMP had been aware of on-street grooming of vulnerable children since 2004 and had failed to address these crimes. Furthermore, Maggie Oliver, a former Greater Manchester police detective, alleged that during Operation Span, GMP chose not to record many crimes disclosed to them by children and that their perpetrators were potentially left to continue their abuse of children. Over the last 6 years, several senior officers within GMP and Rochdale Council have said there was little merit in a further review of these well-documented events. Notwithstanding these reservations, Baroness Beverly Hughes, the then Deputy Mayor of Greater Manchester, was clear that assurance was required on these fundamental concerns. We would like to acknowledge the support Baroness Hughes has given the review team to secure the completion of this report. This report has taken over 6 years to complete, primarily because of the time taken to negotiate the legal complexities in accessing sensitive and personal information held by the statutory agencies. We have researched a vast quantity of contemporaneous records and the detailed case files of 59 children. We invited for interview those individuals we believed could assist our review. Many helped our work, for which we give thanks. Others, regrettably, declined to be interviewed or failed to respond to our invite. We also interviewed 3 survivors. They were all subjected to the most profound abuse, and all 3 had engaged with Operation Span. We applaud their courage in coming forward and are grateful for the support provided to them by Maggie Oliver and her foundation. Their harrowing stories evidence the severe damage to their welfare perpetrated initially by their abusers and subsequently by the criminal justice processes they were exposed to. I will now summarise our main conclusions. We have found compelling evidence that there was widespread organised sexual exploitation of children within Rochdale from at least 2004 onwards. Sarah Rowbotham and her colleagues at the Crisis Intervention Team repeatedly shared their significant concerns during this period with police and children's social care, but the statutory agencies failed to respond appropriately. Very little disruptive or investigative action was taken to tackle these very dangerous individuals, and children were left to be abused by them and subsequently by their associates. In 2007, frustrated by this inaction, Sarah Rowbotham formally notified GMP and Rochdale Council to the presence of a suspected organised crime group dealing in the sexual and criminal exploitation of children in Rochdale. GMP and its partners chose to not progress any investigation against these men, as they were informed that the children were too frightened to assist any inquiry. This was a serious failure to protect these children. It was not for many years, and well after we had commenced our review, that any charges were brought against any of these men for the abuse they committed during this period. While a small-scale investigation commenced in 2007, this investigation resulted in no charges or convictions. GMP under-resourced the inquiry despite repeated requests for support by the officers concerned. Our review has revealed that this pattern was repeated time and again. Over many years, GMP and Rochdale Council were made aware of significant networks of men engaged in the widespread exploitation of children, but failed to prioritise their protection. In 2008, a 15-year-old child disclosed that she had been repeatedly raped and sexually assaulted by staff at a takeaway restaurant in Rochdale. This was a complex inquiry, but senior officers within GMP failed to provide additional resources. Consequently, the investigation only scraped the surface of what had occurred. It is our view that had this investigation been sufficiently resourced, it may have strengthened the evidence to proceed with the prosecution. In 2010, a detective inspector in the Rochdale division provided compelling information that there remained in Rochdale an extensive network of individuals exploiting vulnerable children. However, senior officers within the Rochdale division failed to put in place the required additional resources to support a major investigation. Operation SPAN was launched at the end of 2010. Although the first senior investigating officer put in place a comprehensive plan to identify all victims and suspects, he was removed within weeks, and subsequently the investigation began to focus on a small number of men identified as suspects from the very beginning. We conclude that while Operation SPAN successfully convicted 9 men, it failed to address the numerous crimes and incidents of exploitation brought to the notice of GMP and Children's Social Care at the time. Many children's testimonies were ignored and their abusers were not brought to justice. Furthermore, promises to support the victims during and after the trial were not forthcoming, and these young people were left to be harassed and intimidated by the men who had previously abused them. Operation Doublet, initiated in May 2012, was triggered by concerns in the media that a significant number of perpetrators remained at large following Operation SPAN. While the public face of GMP was reassuring the public that the investigation of the past exploitation of children in Rochdale was a priority, this was far from the case on the ground. Once again, the senior investigating officer repeatedly struggled to sustain sufficient resources to meet the demands of a complex investigation, and on many occasions lost staff to support investigations that were viewed as a higher priority by his superiors. The 2 serious case review over reports published in 2013 by Rochdale Local Safeguarding Children Board explicitly criticised Sarah Rowbotham and the crisis intervention team for not following child protection procedures and for not communicating appropriately with other agencies. In contrast, our review has found compelling evidence to support the view that the crisis intervention team was sharing significant information with the authorities, and senior managers were aware of this prior to the publication of that report. It was a gross misrepresentation to suggest that Sarah Rowbotham and the crisis intervention team were in some way were complicit with this failure and to tarnish the reputation of this small group of professionals. The human cost of these failures to the child victims cannot be overstated. Child 3 was sexually exploited and abused from the age of 14, and this continued for many years. She gave evidence to support the cases of other victims in the Operation SPAN trial in the belief her own abusers would later be brought to justice. This never happened, and after the trial, she was threatened with violence, her house was vandalised, and she was hounded out of her home and neighbourhood. When she requested help from GMP, none was forthcoming, and she was left with nothing, homeless, and with 2 children. Child 44 was made pregnant at the age of 13 by her abuser, who was in his late 30s. Unknown to her and without her consent, GMP took possession of her terminated fetus and retained it for several years at Rochdale Police Station. It was not until 2011, after it was discovered following a routine property review, that she was notified of its existence by Detective Maggie Oliver. Amber was sexually exploited and abused between the ages of 14 to 16. She cooperated fully with the Operation SPAN inquiry, disclosing countless crimes and identifying many suspects. None of these crimes were formally recorded by GMP. This subsequently presented a difficulty for the prosecution, which needed to use her evidence. As a legal tactic, the prosecution named her as a co-conspirator, although it was known she was a victim who had been abused by the men on trial. Amber was not informed that she would be named on the court indictment and was unable at any stage of the procedure to defend herself against these allegations. Nor were any steps taken to protect Amber from the foreseeable threats to her safety. Following the trial, someone threatened to petrol bomb her house, and postings were made on social media identifying where she lived. It is disappointing that although the Rochdale Serious Case Review Over report covered the period up to and including the Operation Span trial, it did not mention how Amber was treated and the damaging consequences of decisions made around her designation as an offender rather than as a victim. It was not until the 12th of April 2022, following the appointment of the current Chief Constable, that GMP issued these 3 survivors with a public apology for these failures. In our report, we initially considered in detail the experiences of 59 children. As our review progressed, we identified 111 children in total. We have concluded that there was a significant probability that 74 of the total number of these children were being sexually exploited. Of these 74, we found that we could only provide assurance that 3 children were appropriately protected by the statutory agencies. In 48 of the cases, there were serious failures to protect them. Towards the end of last year, GMP provided the review team with a schedule of convictions resulting from the 3 major operations that have occurred following the conclusion of Operation Span. In summary, this information demonstrated that in total, 30 men had been convicted and most had received lengthy prison sentences. While this is a significant number of successful convictions, we have noted that these trials only included 13 children in total, of whom only 6 had previously been known to the crisis intervention team and are included in our cohort of 74 children. We therefore plan to return to this matter in the final part of our assurance review. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable for Greater Manchester. Today's report into non-recent child sexual exploitation in Rochdale is the latest chapter in a story with which the public are now sadly increasingly familiar. As is entirely fitting, this report does not pull its punches. The findings evidenced within it are shocking, stark, and shameful. It speaks to the systemic failure of various agencies to pull together and do the obvious and the right thing. And above all, it outlines in painful detail all of those missed opportunities where decisive action could and should have been taken to prevent, disrupt, and prosecute the scourge of what has been evidenced to have been the widespread abuse of children in Rochdale some 10 to 20 years ago. Amongst those agencies legitimately criticised is Greater Manchester Police, and it is on behalf of GMP that I offer my heartfelt apology to all of those victims whom we let down so badly. Relatively soon after taking up office in GMP, I was privileged to meet some of the Rochdale victims of CSE personally, and I took the opportunity both to apologise to them and to hear firsthand of their dreadful experiences. Today, therefore, must principally be about the victims and survivors of the weighty trauma that they suffered at the hands of heartless criminals who frankly cared not a jot for the impact of their offending behavior on the still forming lives of these then young girls. I am so sorry that your childhoods were so irretrievably blighted and scarred with such profound consequences. One of the primary responsibilities of the police is to protect the vulnerable from the cruel and the predatory, and in this regard, we failed you. In respect of GMP's failures specifically, the report highlights clear evidence to suggest that CSE in Rochdale was both widespread and known about amongst those with the responsibility to act. Exploited children were poorly safeguarded and on occasion not safeguarded at all. Organisational responses were generally too slow in emerging. They were under-resourced and they were prematurely curtailed despite it being clear that there was more to do. Offenders were neither effectively disrupted nor properly brought to justice. Senior GMP officers failed to address what was clearly a strategic issue with a fitting and sustainable strategic solution. And GMP failed to heed the voices of those who were speaking up on behalf of victims and who were pointing to the inadequacy of the organisational response. And it is at this juncture that I too would like to pay tribute to Sarah Rowbotham and Maggie Oliver. This report speaks very clearly to the credibility of the concerns that they had expressed and acknowledges their personal and persistent advocacy on behalf of so many vulnerable girls. Both Sarah and Maggie have travelled a hard road in the interests of others, and we are all substantially indebted to them. They, of course, remain impassioned advocates for victims, and I am especially grateful to Maggie and her foundation, who, against an agreed protocol with GMP, now meet with senior public protection officers on a monthly basis to discuss all specific referrals that come through her foundation. This is an essential element in making sure that no child should ever fall through the cracks again, and provides an invaluable safety net and bolsters our contemporary practices and multi-agency arrangements. I do consider that the language of needing to learn lessons has become somewhat hackneyed in the public mind. Far from reassuring people, particularly when these types of findings have all been heard before, it causes decent people to feel enormously frustrated at the failure of agencies, including the police, to simply do what we are paid for and to do it professionally. In this context, and in respect of learning, however, I do think it important to draw a distinction between then and the way that CSE is now dealt with by the police and our partner agencies. The lessons from our past have been well and truly learned, and they are solidly baked into today's practice. I would never stand here and complacently assert that we are perfect. We are certainly not. And regrettably, mistakes could well similarly be made into the future. But what I am saying is that our current practices and working arrangements have altered dramatically. They are now reflective of the highest nationally derived professional standards. Our frontline officers are better trained so that early referrals are effectively handled and routed. Every district across Greater Manchester contributes to a multi-agency, complex safeguarding hub. GMP's contribution to the Rochdale hub, for example, today consists of 10 detective constables, 2 detective sergeants, a detective inspector, all of whom are overseen by Detective Chief Inspector. Each of the district safeguarding hubs are supported by GMP's CSE Major Investigations Team. This is a corporate resource which comprises 107 dedicated officers. The expansion of this team owes much to the direct support of the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, for which I am grateful. Those working on the hubs or as part of the CSE MIT are highly specialist officers who are trained to an exacting standard. GMP's strategic approach to CSE is now effectively governed. This governance encompasses all aspects of training, professional practice and development, as well as practical case management. Woven into the very fabric of our response to CSE are a number of external agencies and third sector organisations, such as the National Association for People Abused in Childhood, We Are Survivors, Manchester Rape Crisis, the St Mary's SARC, and, as has already been outlined, Maggie's Foundation 2. These agencies are here to help GMP, to provide challenge, to advise, and to give voice to vulnerable people. Our practice is informed by Operation Hydrant on behalf of the College of Policing, which produces authorised professional practice for our senior investigating officers. And we are inspected directly by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and indirectly by Ofsted, who assess our partnership arrangements. In short, I am confident that GMP and our partners now have the capacity and the capability to meet the highest of standards sustainably and to dynamically adopt different approaches where necessary to reflect further organisational learning, amendments to national best practice, and to pivot very quickly to recover live situations when we get things wrong. It remains, of course, a source of profound regret that we cannot turn back the clock and undo all of the damage done to innocent young lives. I do, however, want to reassure both victims and the public that we remain determined to do all that we can to bring offenders to justice. Since Operation Span and the 9 men then convicted, in Rochdale alone, a further 135 arrests have been made, 432 charges have been laid, and 32 convictions obtained, which have resulted in 355 years imprisonment for offenders who might have thought that they had escaped justice. Last year, Op Lytton resulted in the conviction of a further 5 offenders for a further 22 offences, and these men were sentenced to 71.5 years imprisonment. As of today, we have another 34 individuals who are currently charged and are due to stand trial during this year and next. In addition to Op Lytton, which continues, there are currently a further 7 live CSE investigations taking place in Rochdale. With reference to the 74 children, which Malcolm has referred to, GMP has directly engaged with 72 of them. There are sound risk-assessed reasons for not engaging with 2 of the 74. But nonetheless, our victim-led responses to date reflect what they are asking for perfectly understandable reasons, including a reluctance to reopen old trauma. A majority of the 72, who are of course now adults, engaged by the force feel unable to provide evidence to support a traditional criminal justice outcome. For some, procedural justice is just as important, or indeed more so, than criminal justice, and we are supportive of survivor-informed choice. 26 of the 72 have, however, reported specific offences and have or are supporting prosecutions. We will continue to engage with all of these survivors and to shape our responses to their requests and preferences. From a policing perspective, and wherever possible, we are, of course, keen to mount criminal prosecutions such that offenders can be properly brought to justice and held to account. The door will remain ever open to survivors of CSE, and we will work at a pace that reflects their needs. We would encourage all victims of CSE always to come forward and access the care and the support that we are keen to offer. The GMP that I lead will pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry relentlessly and without fear or favour. I know that some who might have thought that they had got away with these dreadful crimes are now living in fear that a reckoning is coming. My message to these people is that you are right to be fearful, and you may be the next person that we arrest. No matter the passage of time, we will continue to develop the evidence to put you away. This is the least that we can do for those whom we have let down and whose experiences have so galvanized my officers to embody the improvement that the contents of this report demands. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Neil Emmett. I'm the current leader of Rochdale Council for the last 2.5 years, since 2021. I want to start today by repeating what Rochdale Borough Council has said many times in the past, that the council is truly sorry that those people who were at the council at the time, between 2004 and 2013, like many other places across the country and in other parts of Greater Manchester, did not recognise what was happening and failed to take necessary and appropriate action. I know that no amount of apology or contrition can ever repair the awful damage that was done to the lives of the victims and survivors, or indeed to the lone voices fighting to be heard against callous organisational indifference. Whilst many perpetrators have been brought to justice, and some are still being brought to justice, it truly begs the question as to whether the survivors will ever feel a sense of justice. However, I will say it again today so that nobody can be in any doubt. Rochdale Council is truly sorry. Next, I think it's only right that I thank the Mayor, Andy Burnham, for commissioning this report in 2017, and also to Malcolm Newsom and Gary and the rest of their team for their diligent work in investigating and compiling this report. There were, however, some people who did put their heads above the parapet at that dreadful time, and they had the conviction and the courage to alert the appropriate authorities, but who were sadly ignored and not taken seriously. One such person was Maggie Oliver, who worked on Operation Augusta in Manchester and then on Operation Span for GMP in Rochdale. And it was thanks to Maggie that many of the victims gain the confidence to come forward and give evidence against the criminals who perpetrated those dreadful crimes. And Maggie continues her work to this day to support survivors and victims of sexual exploitation through her foundation. I want to pay special tribute to Sarah Rowbottom and her colleagues who worked in the crisis intervention team. They fought like tigers to protect vulnerable children, while so many others turned their backs on them, ignored them, and didn't take their referrals of child sexual exploitation seriously. 181 referrals. Sarah stands out as a beacon of integrity during that awful period, and I, for one, will never accept nor countenance any criticism of her actions. Sarah and her colleagues at the crisis intervention team were told by so-called professionals that those abused children had made a lifestyle choice. I want to say to you today, those kind of words, that kind of language used by so-called professionals to describe vulnerable, abused, and traumatized children frankly makes me feel both physically sick and extremely irate in equal measure. I think it's only right to mention today that there was one Rochdale councillor who raised the issue of child sexual exploitation during that terrible period. And that was Sarah Rowbottom's mum, the late Councillor Maureen Rowbottom. Maureen raised the issue with the appropriate council officers, but like Sarah and her team, Maureen was ignored and not taken seriously. As the current leader of Rochdale Council, I wish to assure the public that far more rigorous practices are in place today to protect vulnerable children. For the past several years, the Council has supported those survivors, now adults, who wanted our help, and we will continue to do so. And we have also helped the police to bring more perpetrators to justice, and I know that those operations and investigations are continuing. Back in 2012, the Council looked at the actions of staff involved in these cases going back to 2005. Those responsible for the failings were reported to their regulatory body, and internal disciplinary action was taken against those that had not already left the Council. None of them have worked in Rochdale since, nor will they ever do so again. They are gone, and they are long gone. Since then, Rochdale has overhauled and invested heavily in our services, and we have shared our learning with other councils from across the United Kingdom, including most recently delegations from Northern Ireland and the Isle of Man. We have educated schools, taxi drivers, off licenses, takeaways, barbers, licensed premises, and local residents, and in particular those involved in the nighttime economy, about the signs of child sexual exploitation and what to do about it. Rochdale has contributed to several other reviews and helped to strengthen services across the region and the rest of the country. Our multi-agency Sunrise team, which works to prevent, detect, and prosecute child sexual exploitation while supporting those affected, is staffed with dedicated, caring professionals who are committed to the protection of children. In 2021, the Sunrise team won the Public Sector Children's Team Award at the Children and Young People Now Annual Awards. The team has been instrumental in trying to rebuild public confidence in child protection services in our borough. But please be aware that the team is not complacent and that it is constantly looking for ways to improve and enhance the protection of children. I must say very clearly to everyone, we will be ever vigilant in our efforts to ensure that these awful systemic failures do not happen again and that children will be protected. So finally, once more, I would like to apologise on behalf of Rochdale Council to the survivors of those terrible, abusive crimes that took place from 2004 to 2013, and also to apologise to those dedicated individuals who were ignored and not taken seriously when they had the courage to raise the alarm. Thank you.
I'm just going to get some water after my mum got mentioned. Big day. I'd like to thank the Mayor's office for paying attention. I don't want to cry. I'd like to thank Malcolm and Gary for their diligence and independence. I met Victoria Agalola. She was a lovely girl. When she died, I cut out her picture out of the paper and I put it on our office wall as a testament, but also as a reminder of the importance of what we were trying to do and the consequences for those young women we were working with if we failed to protect them. I've always been aware of young people who have the strength to come forward, to share their evidence with the police and go through the hell of a judicial process. And all those young people who shared their experiences with a crisis team worker at the time they were being violated. It's often said the survivors of exploitation were children who weren't loved. So I want to acknowledge the trauma that parents, carers and other family members went through when they were doing their best to protect their children and had little or no support, and the devil at the door was too powerful. I'd like to thank Sue Hogg, Simon Lewis, Philippa Lawton, Nicole Taylor, Matt Baker and Henry Singer for dramatising and documenting this appalling series of events. How many more times will it take a drama or a documentary and the ensuing public outcry to call people and organisations to account? Crisis intervention team, the team of women I worked with were highly skilled. They were tenacious and committed to the young people we worked with and for. I thought I was good at working with young people, but these women had skills way beyond mine. It's disgusting that we were disbelieved, scrutinised, misrepresented, scapegoated, and then publicly and nationally discredited by both the police and local authority. We were blamed, and they said it was my fault. The team worked so hard, we had to hear horrendous things. We worried about young people, and we tried every strategy to try and change things, only then to have our professionalism and qualifications questioned in a review. All we were trying to do was to get protective services to do their job. That's disgusting. I was described as being difficult to work with. Well, what did you expect? Children were being raped every day. But both the police and Rochdale Children's Services told me and kept telling me it had nothing to do with them. The number of young people we successfully engaged with and the information they felt able to share with us is clear in this report. No one's ever asked me how we were able to do this. These were voluntary relationships. Young people came to us. They even brought their friends. They felt safe enough to tell us, even though they knew we would breach their confidentiality. They even came back to us when other services let them down. How can lessons be learned if no one ever asked us how we did that? Since 2004, all the evidence was given to Greater Manchester Police and Social Care at the time, and it's now being used to support new prosecutions. Even now, whilst they are celebrating successful convictions, Greater Manchester Police failed to acknowledge the role of crisis intervention team played in providing them with corroborative evidence and contemporaneous notes. Everything that is being done now should have been done then. It's not like you're waiting for a new bit of tech to make it possible. All it would have taken is the right people actually giving a damn. After Operation Span, we were told by Pennine Care Foundation Trust, our employers, to draw a line under it. When they knew we had dozens of other cases that needed investigating. We had names, addresses, telephone numbers, and very detailed accounts of serious sexual assaults against children. Alongside Greater Manchester Police, they only spent time and effort questioning our numbers. Well, they weren't numbers, they were real children. We now know from the report that this was a decision made by those organisations not to investigate. Why would they do that? That's disgusting. Asking us to draw a line was beyond belief. We couldn't believe that no one wanted to protect the young people or to track down and prosecute perpetrators. This made me ill. It made the whole team ill. I also want to say shame on every individual who was asked to give evidence to this inquiry but refused to do so. You were paid by the public when you made those decisions to lie about me and my team in a serious case review, when you failed to take appropriate action to protect children, or you failed to investigate crimes. Shame on you. Clearly, it was easier to discredit, diminish, and dismiss the fact that children were being manipulated, poisoned, and raped. Shame on those who only recently said we have nothing to learn from this inquiry. We've already reviewed what went wrong. We're so much better now. Shame on you. There's a lot of people at the moment being asked whether their truth finally being acknowledged makes things better. Well, it doesn't, and it definitely doesn't in this case help the dozens of young people who suffered the horrendous abuse detailed in this report. The scale of abuse was known to protective services at the time, and they chose not to take appropriate action. Someone needs to explain why. It's tiring to continually hear organisations talking about learning lessons from past injustice and appalling practice. I can't applaud the fact that services are better now, because so they should be.
First of all, can I just say that I agree with every single word you said there, Sarah. I don't really know where to start because, like Sarah, this has been nearly 20 years of my life and it's almost destroyed my life. But what I want to start off with, first of all, is saying thank you to Mr. Burnham. And my heartfelt thanks to Gary and Malcolm, who I have the absolute greatest respect for, because every page of this report has taken blood, sweat and tears on their behalf to get to the truth. This report took me 4 hours to read on Friday. And if any of you take the time to read it, you will see that this report was commissioned in 2017. There was nothing shared from Greater Manchester Police or from Rochdale Council until the end of 2021. because they were pushing back and pretending that these things hadn't happened. They didn't want the truth to come out. But it's down to the determination of Gary and Malcolm and the persistence. And I have to say, I don't say very much good about the police, as Mr. Watson knows, but there was a slight change in attitude when you came in that there is communication on perhaps not enough of a level, but it is certainly better than your predecessor. What I would say, though, is that I take great exception with the speech that you've read today. It has been prepared for you by a very powerful organisation, a PR department that kicks in when a report like this is published and pretends that these are failures of the past. This report talks about the past. But what I want to do is to bring it from the past into the present and into the future, because my work in the Maggie Oliver Foundation now means that I have current information about what is going on today. And I would say categorically, and I am sorry, Mr. Watson, but the failures that happened then are still happening now. We have more communication, for sure. But we do not have a system that supports victims, that listens to their voices. And when they do challenge the system, unfortunately, the organisation closes ranks. It protects the organisation. Institutional protection and covering up what is really going on is what I'm hearing today. I'm hearing those at the top of these organisations saying that things are now better. Well, we are currently supporting in the foundation over 371 victims today who say they are still being failed by GMP. And their voices are silenced. We support them now to try and be heard, to go into the system and make a complaint. They will go to professional standards. And as I repeatedly say, it is police marking their own homework. They then go to the IOPC, but any complaint that they make goes directly back into the police force against who the complaint is made. Very often the IOPC are not even aware of the complaint that has been made. We support those survivors, and very often we come to the media to share those cases because those complaints fall on deaf ears. And what I am saying today is that it's okay to have a report like this, but I want change from this report. I don't want in 10 years' time to be standing here again with another report about failures. Amber, for instance, was criminalised as a child victim of abuse. And until just 2 years ago, the organisation that was Greater Manchester Police insisted that that was the right thing to do. To this day, the Crown Prosecution Service still maintain that they did nothing wrong. They have still not apologised to Amber. They still believe that that tactical option was a tool that they were entitled to use. What this report doesn't cover is the 10 years since the terms of reference ended. The terms of reference for this report were 2013. We are now in 2024. There is a big gap in what happened then and where we are now. And reading this report, and I'm back in the place I was in 12 years ago. I can't sleep at night. I'm wondering what I could have done differently. I'm thinking about the girls who are like my kids now. I was talking to yesterday, child 3, she is out of the country at the moment, or she would have been here. But I think about those girls, about what's happened to them, you know, things that you don't know. And I don't want the same things to happen again. This is very much about the past. We are now in the present, and I'm seeing what is going on today. Far too often, we have the same things happening. And I listen to all the numbers that you quote, Mr. Watson, and the departments that you talk about. And I have to say that within the last month alone, We have got now an ex-serving Greater Manchester police officer who worked in that very department that you talk about, specialist in child sexual exploitation, and that officer could have been me 12 years ago. She had been banging on doors. She has been desperately trying to get a very serious case where many, many children are being abused taken seriously. She was unable to get anybody to listen. Her complaints are falling on deaf ears. The resources are not being put into that case to ensure that those children are not being protected. And that is what happened on Operation Span. Resources were not put into it. Victims were ring-fenced, a tiny number of victims, where dozens and dozens of other victims were left to their own devices. I have to take this back to Operation Augusta. Again, I was extremely grateful to Mr. Burnham for putting phase 1 into announcing the first stage of this series of reviews. And I reiterate what Sarah's just said. That independent review, again done by Gary and Malcolm, was something that I never thought I would ever read. A damning truth about how those children had been failed. A young girl who had died. And the official finding of that report was that the reason that happened was because GMP would not put resources into investigating that case. After that report, I think it was 5 senior officers and retired officers were referred to the IOPC for investigation. None of them would be interviewed. Ultimately, the Independent Office for Police Conduct couldn't bring any action against them because there was insufficient evidence. The minutes of the meeting where Operation Augusta was closed down had gone astray. They were lost. So now we have still nobody held accountable for failing dozens and dozens of children in 2005, allowing 100 paedophiles to continue to walk the streets. On this case again, you know, Gary and Malcolm make it very, very clear that there was a tiny number of the abusers ever held to account in relation to years of abuse. They are still walking the streets of Rochdale, who is child 3 in this report, and she will not mind me saying that. She came face to face with her rapist in Asda, in Rochdale, several years after the court case. He is back in Rochdale. That is not justice. He wasn't charged with rape. The charges brought were insufficient. We need more serious charges. We need proper sentencing. We need a change in the system. And, you know, I'm talking about this now. I've got so many notes, but I'm not reading them. But I think the easiest way to try to explain what I'm saying is to refer you all back to the drama that's on at the moment, all about the post office. I'm afraid to say that if anybody scratched the surface and really dug deep about what has happened, not just within Greater Manchester Police, throughout the country, about how victims are being silenced, how they do not have a voice, how the police complaint system is unfit for purpose, that's where we need to see change. We need accountability at the top. And you know, I have to give credit where credit's due, that I do want to see movement. I want to see conversations. You know, I've not made friends on this journey because I speak the truth. I don't want to make friends with anybody. We are not funded by GMCA. We are not funded by the police. We are funded by the public. And that is a really deliberate decision because I want to be able to stand here and say it as it really is without fear that somebody's going to withdraw funding. The truth is a really uncomfortable truth, and it isn't one that I would like, it's one I would like to be different. I would like to say today that things are 1,000,000 times better. But if I went to every one of the victims and survivors who approach the Maggie Oliver Foundation every day to say, are things different? They would tell you, no, they are not. There are still far, far too many victims who are not being heard, who are being criminalised, who are being intimidated, who are being silenced when they dare to raise their head above the parapet. That officer in that CSE unit, she has tried desperately to get the resources put into the case that she was dealing with, a complex case, begging and pleading. Those resources were not forthcoming. And what I would really like to see from the Chief Constable is a call for more resources, for priority in policing. Because I'm sorry, but whilst we hear people in positions of authority saying that things are better, everything has improved, we no longer have these problems reported in this review. Nothing will change. For me, the buck stops at the top. This needs to be addressed properly from government level. We need a radical overhaul of policing, of the criminal justice system. We need extra resources. We need better training. We need support for officers on the ground who are not getting that support. If they're carrying a crime queue of 40 complex crimes, you can't blame that individual officer for not investigating them thoroughly. This is about leadership, it is about resources, it is about prioritising what we as a country think is important. And I think that this report really clearly shows where those failures are. But it's not just a report. This is a story of thousands of children's lives that have been blighted, and a lack of willingness to listen where these mistakes are happening. If they are heard at the start of the journey, the future journey for those children can be changed. But without people listening, we are never going to change things. I could go on all day, and I know I've missed a lot, but what I would like the media here to do today is to realise that this is not a local Manchester problem. The media are very much London-centric. This is a national problem about the state of policing, about a system that doesn't work, that actually needs more resources, needs better training, and actually accountability for people at the top who are not resourcing these investigations properly. I think if you read the report, Gary and Malcolm make it very clear that there has been no accountability for these failures. And that whilst these are institutional failings, behind all these decisions are individuals. These are individual decisions that have prevented resources going into these cases. And that is where the solution lies, in resourcing them properly, in not, empty words and gaslighting when we get a report which is as thorough and as honest as this one is. I want to see accountability. I want to see change. I want to see people listening. And at the foundation, we are helping people today to be heard, giving them a better chance of wriggling their way through a system which is really hostile, very difficult to navigate, and where one voice carries no weight. In this report, we have got a lot more than one voice, but in the foundation now, we are sharing the voices of over 4,000 victims that we have supported since 2019. This is my life's work. I think this is probably why I was put on this earth. I wish it wasn't. But now I'm not on my own. We do have a team, and I know my subject. I don't want this to be a sorry about what happened in the past. I want it to be a commitment to what is going to change in the future. And I know you say that we are communicating, and we are. And we did meet 2 years ago, and I am extremely grateful to you personally for apologising to those girls, but I haven't heard a word from you in 2 years. And, I am here. Just ask me. Communication is the key. And if nobody communicates, nothing will change. And I want to see change. I don't want my life to have been this broken record that keeps saying the same thing. It takes good people. And, Andy Burnham, I do really credit you for putting these reviews together. I am grateful. And Kate, I hope that the Baird review will be as honest as this one is. Gary and Malcolm, you have my eternal gratitude and the greatest respect. And I know you got a lot of criticism about the Oldham review. I know that. And what I would say is that it's because there was nobody working in Oldham who knew what was going on. Operation Augusta And Operation Span reviews are honest, they are thorough, they are the truth. And the reason they are truthful is because I knew the inside story. I worked on these cases. I shared that truth with you, and you took it and you wrote reports. Sadly, in Oldham, that didn't happen. All the victims in Oldham were forbidden to speak to the review team, apart from one. And the reason that one girl spoke to the review team is because she came to me and she said, I want to speak to that team. So the report was very limited because the truth wasn't in there, because you were prevented from hearing that truth. Accountability, progress, communication, working together, that is what this report shows didn't happen. I fully agree with you, Sarah. The vast majority of officers approached refused to be interviewed by the review team. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. They should be forced to speak about where their failures lay. You know, if I was accused of murder with you, Sarah, and I refused to say it was you and you refused to say it was me, we would have joint enterprise. For me, everybody who is responsible for these mistakes should be held accountable, not just a police officer on the ground who is overwhelmed with a crime queue that they can't manage. They need support to do their job properly. So I don't blame them. I blame the resourcing, the decision-making, the prioritising, and those decisions matter. Now, if you don't believe what I am saying, I want to finish off by reading a quote from the report, which struck me on Friday when I read this report. Because don't listen to me. This Detective Chief Superintendent B, I know who she was. And it was one of the first people that I spoke to when I was trying to raise these problems. That was 12 years ago. 12 years of my life and 12 years of Sarah's life and all these children. She was forbidden from saying this when she was a serving police officer, in the same way that in the post office drama, the guy who worked in Fujitsu was unable to speak the truth because you are silenced by an organisation. I felt at the time that she got what I was saying, but she was prevented from doing anything about it. Finally, 12 years later, she said, and she's not all that long ago resigned, I had a very painful last few years in GMP as a result of trying to push the victim's agenda in terms of vulnerability and the way we deal with victims, in particular the way we record crimes and some of the ethical stuff all around it. Not just me, there were a number of us, and we were hitting a very big brick wall. Pockets of good practice, pockets of things happening, but basically then overridden and overruled by this attitude that our victims are lying, particularly around sexual offences. And I don't understand where it comes from, because nobody automatically assumes if you're reporting a burglary that you're lying. But if a woman is reporting a rape, there is this assumption that they're not telling the truth for whatever reason. And I couldn't get past it. And there was a number of us, we tried for a very long time to get past it, and we never could. It just kept coming round and round and round again. GMP is crap at dealing with victims because they don't believe them half the time. And that is specifically around sexual offences, adults and child and domestic abuse, and I don't know why. That is a current quote from a very senior officer. And I would add to that the officer who was recently resigned from this specialist unit, saying that she was unable to get any resources to investigate serious child abuse. I don't really need to say any more, but please read every page of this report and remember the children that have shared their stories for this truth to come out. And please, Mr. Watson, allow some of the survivors of Operation Augusta, Operation Green Jacket, to be interviewed by the assurance review team, because at the moment your legal department is not allowing them to speak to the review team. So that is something which they need to hear in order to assess properly where we go in the future. Organisations like the police, like Rochdale Council, like the Crown Prosecution Service are powerful organisations. And a little voice like mine or Sarah's, we are squashed. And if we don't have any chance of being heard, how on earth would a child like or Amber or all these other children, they must be heard and we must see change. And I would ask the media to shine a spotlight on those corners that normally don't get attention, because it's only with your help and public support and public outrage continuing that really we will see the changes that we must have if we're going to avoid another report like this in 10 years. Thank you.
I know every one of us will have the survivors of the terrible abuse laid bare in this report at the very top of our minds today. The appalling acts they suffered at the hands of the men who attacked and exploited them were compounded by the unforgivable failures of the very statutory agencies whose role should have been to protect them. I join the Mayor, the Chief Constable and the leader of Rochdale Council in offering our profound apologies to all the survivors. I also want to add my tribute to Sarah Robotham and Maggie Oliver, whose warnings were repeatedly dismissed or ignored. They were criticised and stigmatised when they should have been listened to and their warnings acted on. They and the survivors are vindicated by today's report. I'm very grateful to the independent review team, to Malcolm and to Gary, for their meticulous work in preparing this report. Andy and Malcolm have also both acknowledged the role of my predecessor as Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverly Hughes, in progressing this review, and I echo their tributes to Bev. It will fall to me, my responsibility as her successor, to ensure that the lessons that we have learned from this and from earlier reports are accepted in full, understood, and embedded in professional practice across all statutory agencies in Greater Manchester, that the resources are in place to enable them to serve and support survivors today, those in the future, and those who have experienced abuse in the past, to ensure that those bodies recognise and meet their responsibilities for safeguarding vulnerable children in every part of the city region. With the knowledge that we have today, there can be no excuses. And I look forward to receiving the independent review team's fourth report later this year, which I hope will give assurance to the Mayor and to me that our structures and governance are fit for purpose to meet our solemn obligation to protect our children from abuse. The Chief Constable and Councillor Emmett have already explained, however, that we've not waited for these reports to put our house in order. Now, that is not to deny that mistakes will still be made, that there is more to do. And Maggie this morning has highlighted the support that she continues to offer to survivors, and she and Sarah are right to continue to press us to be the best we can and for change. But much has changed since 2013, when this report concludes. I had the privilege of visiting the Sunrise team in Rochdale last week, and I saw for myself the dedication and professionalism of the team members and the work that they are doing to protect and support vulnerable children and families. That multidiscipline multi-agency approach that's adopted in Sunrise is a model of the good practice that we will strive to see everywhere, and the team can be very proud of their work. But as we've heard, as Malcolm observed in his opening remarks, there remains much to be done to secure justice for survivors. The Chief Constable has described the substantial, ongoing investigative work that is taking place. And in my role as Deputy Mayor, I will be particularly focusing my scrutiny of Greater Manchester Police on this. Today will be a hard day for many who read this report. But of course, it is hardest of all for those who have experienced or are experiencing sexual exploitation and abuse. Please can I conclude by urging anyone who either suspects someone of committing sexual abuse or is or has been a victim to come forward to report it. You will be taken seriously, cared for, and supported. Every action will be taken to protect you, and you will be listened to so that the nature and the pace of the action that's taken achieves the outcome that you want. That's the pledge of all statutory agencies in the room today, and the Mayor and I are determined that we will make good on it.
Well, can I just thank colleagues from the media for your patience and for your attention in listening to all of our speakers today. I hope you will understand that time needed to be given for people to react fully to this truly, well, impactful report. It is impactful in a most profound way, and I think you've seen that from everybody who has spoken this morning. So I want to thank you for listening in the way that you have, but also to thank all of our speakers who spoke honestly from the heart. When I set up this review, this is exactly what I wanted, for this issue to be debated in this way, without people hiding behind things, without sort of obfuscation. That was what I was trying to break through. I was trying to clear that away. I was trying to create a different culture in Greater Manchester on this issue. And I think you've had a demonstration of that today. We're not where we need to be, but that's why we're doing this. And it's why we're going forward now to a fourth stage of this report. There will be no complacency whatsoever as long as I am mayor on this issue. When I set up the review, I set the central question of whether or not the Greater Manchester public could have assurance about the arrangements in place now for protecting children. And that is and remains the question that has to be answered. I certainly will not rest, and I'm sure I speak for the Deputy Mayor as well, neither of us will rest until we have assurance that arrangements are the right arrangements in place. So following this publication today, we are proceeding to the fourth and final stage of this review, where we will ask Malcolm and Gary to address that question for us. And so, nobody is saying today that things aren't as they were. It is different now, for sure. But nobody is saying today anything other than we need to go further in finding out whether they are as strong as they should be. And we will work with the team to make sure we get an answer to that question that I set at the start. As most of the speakers have said, this review, the whole process, has taken longer and has been harder than it should have been. In paragraph 1.16, the report says that 10 individuals were invited for an interview to support the work of the review, and Maggie referenced this. 2 sent a written response and 8 did not reply. paragraph 1.17 records that 5 former GMP officers were asked to give an interview but didn't reply. I am confident, and I know the review team is too, that the issues in relation to Rochdale, as Maggie said, have been fully investigated, and we can say that really clearly today, and that's the consensus amongst people on the platform. That said, simply ignoring a request to comply with a review of this kind is just not good enough. It's not good enough for the reasons that I think Sarah gave. So today I will be writing to the Home Secretary to share our experiences in conducting this review and to suggest some important changes we believe are needed. I am sure the Home Secretary would agree with me that mayors and police and crime commissioners should be supported to carry out reviews of this kind, difficult as they are. But it should be easier for people to do what we are doing. And I think this is particularly important given that the National Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse has concluded. Who does carry forward the work? Who ensures that the spotlight Maggie spoke about is shone continually and that therefore is accountability? If we are to have that, it's essential that new powers must be introduced. Firstly, I believe reviews commissioned by mayors or police and crime commissioners should be given a formal status and the powers to require public servants, whether in post, retired or moved to another organisation, to give evidence. There should be a way that they can be properly and fairly held to account, even if they have left public service or required. Secondly, as Malcolm pointed out, changes in the law are needed in respect of data sharing between organisations. If we are to get the open learning culture we need, it must be made possible to share information more swiftly between statutory agencies and formal review teams. And I am staggered by how many obstacles this issue has presented in this review. Thirdly, alongside the other measures, routes should be established at local and national level for victims of child sexual exploitation and whistleblowers to report in confidence if they do not get an appropriate response from the statutory bodies. And this could be done via mayors, PCCs, or designated voluntary survivor organisations. And more broadly, for the reasons given this morning, there is now, in my view, an overwhelming and unanswerable case for a full duty of candour on all public servants, requiring them to be truthful and cooperative with inquiries of this kind. We believe these changes could be made through the Victims Bill currently going through Parliament or through the comprehensive Hillsborough law that I have repeatedly called for. In conclusion, we are utterly determined that this review into child sexual exploitation will bring permanent culture change, both here in Greater Manchester and across the country. Thank you for listening and thank you for attending.